Welcome to CapitolView, where we discuss the latest in state government and politics. I'm Hannah Meisel with NPR Illinois. Joining us this week is Dave McKinney, government and politics reporter for Chicago public radio station WBEZ. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Hey, Hannah.
And also here is Sarah Mansur, State House reporter for Capitol News, Illinois. Glad you're here, Sarah.
Thanks for having me, Hannah, and congrats.
Let's get down to it. So by the time this airs, President Joe Biden will have signed this $1.9 trillion so-called American Rescue Plan. It's obviously quite massive. It rivals the, initial CARES Act funding that Congress passed nearly a year ago, a few weeks into the pandemic. I believe that state government is set to receive about $7.5 billion, with another $5.5 billion set aside for city and county governments in Illinois. Dave, what does this infusion of cash mean for Illinois? And, is it going to solve all of our fiscal problems, or is it, just going to stabilize us for the time being?
Well, no, I don't think it's going to solve all of our problems. I mean, when we have $130 billion in unaccrued, unfunded pension liabilities, you can tell the scope of the problem is massive. But this infusion, this one-time infusion, rivals anything I can remember on the beat. And even going back to like the days of the tobacco settlement, that was a big chunk of money coming in then, and then we were only talking a few $100 million at a time. Here, as you mentioned, $7.5 billion gives the state great flexibility, at least for the current and the next fiscal year, to really kind of take a breather in a way. I mean, if you remember a year ago when the pandemic was just launching and there was this just sort of panic buying of PPE, the governor and the administration, they were just trying to get masks and gowns and paying exorbitant prices in cases and driving up a lot of costs. And so this money enables them to go back and, pay down those debts. I mean, they took out close to $3 billion in loans from the Federal Reserve Bank to help cover COVID-related costs. So it'll help with that. And, Chicago is in line for, I believe, $1.8 billion of that money. And then the Chicago public school system gets another $1.8 billion. So there's a lot of money for Chicago. But I also think it's really important for downstate to understand that it's not all just going to Chicago, because if you look around the big cities in central and southern Illinois, I mean, Bloomington, I think they're in line for about 17 million, Champaign, close to 20 million, Carbondale, about 5.5 million, Peoria, 22 million, Springfield, 25 million. So you get an idea there. For all those towns, it's big money coming in the door, and it gives every mayor and every elected official a little bit of breathing room.
Right. I mean, it's been tough for state and local governments, especially quite small ones. What had happened in the spring was, this CARES Act funding was filtered through the state to state and local governments, and there was a big fight there over the spring and summer. And some smaller local governments said, we don't have the time and resources to deal with the state to apply for these funds that should rightfully be ours. So, we're going to skip it. So, and I see another kind of fight looming if the state decides to administer these new, American Rescue Act funds again. Especially because there's some history there. But, Dave, you're right. This is very welcome news for a lot of state and local governments. And Sarah, there are, I believe, $275 million for vaccine distribution efforts in Illinois, and another $1.5 billion for testing and public health departments. What is that going to mean for the vaccine distribution in Illinois? We saw kind of a slow and rocky start, but it's definitely picking up. I mean, depending on where you are in the state, you might have a very long line, a long wait. There's a lot of confusion up, in the vaccine distribution in the United Center in Chicago, but, down in Southern Illinois, there's hardly any wait. You just have to show up. So Sarah, what is this extra money going to mean for vaccine distributions in these public health departments that have been stretched thin during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully it means that there will be more resources and make it easier for people to have access to vaccines in the northern part of the state where it's been more difficult. And as you mentioned, the vaccine rollout at the United Center, there was a lot of confusion, and the Pritzker administration changed who would be eligible. So initially it was anyone in the state, and then over the weekend they made it so that it was only people who live in Chicago, and that created a lot of confusion. And I know, there were very long lines and people are waiting. So hopefully they will be able to have more staff who will be able to administer vaccines, and it will just be more accessible to people right now who are having a very hard time making appointments, who are in the eligible groups.
And of course, the more shots we get into arms, the faster our economy gets back to normal. Although, the governor, even yesterday, we're filming on Thursday, even the governor's still warning about these possible virus variants that, especially this variant that first appeared in Brazil that looks like it might, because it's different than the others, it might evade vaccines a little bit more, but. I think there's a lot more hope than there was a couple months ago, and surely a lot more hope than there was a year ago when, the World Health Organization first declared COVID a global pandemic. And, I'm sure everyone remembers where they were. I'm sure it'll become in the future, just like you remember where you were on September 11th, you remember where you were the last normal, kind of day that you had before COVID. But Dave, earlier you had mentioned, this money, while it's a lot of money, it's not a panacea for Illinois' long-standing fiscal troubles. And you mentioned, Illinois' pension debts. If we recall last spring, Senate President Don Harmon, while he was still just a few months in the job, he made what a lot of people kind of decided was a tactical error when he wrote a letter to Illinois' congressional delegation and asked for basically, money to help with Illinois' pension funds. And ironically, some of this might help a little bit, although the comptroller yesterday, she put out a statement and said not a penny will be spent on Illinois' old pension debt. But Moody's Analytics weighed in on Illinois' pension debt, and then also Standard & Poor's and Fitch Ratings, these three big ratings agencies that say, hey, you're creditworthy or you're not. And, for the last year, all three ratings agencies have said that we're just a notch above junk status. So, tell me, what did these ratings agencies say this week, Dave? And what does it mean for Illinois' future going forward?
Well, I mean, all three of the rating agencies weighed in because the state's about to go out into the borrowing market, and that's what triggers these sort of assessments of our financial picture. In Illinois, I was reading the Fitch analysis. They're rated triple B minus, which is the lowest of any state right now, and we've held that status for the better part of a decade. It's something that we can't shake here. We have trouble because of that pension debt, and there just is, an unwillingness, I think, to kind of come up with the revenue to pay our expenses, basically. Simple as that. And so what we saw this week, though, from all three rating agencies, on the heels of this infusion of stimulus money coming to Illinois, they talked about how, it brings a level of resilience that Illinois hasn't had in recent memory to deal with some of its budget issues. Now, I think what's an interesting thing unfolding, and to build on a point you made earlier, Hannah, about the fight now possibly in city councils and legislatures, how does the money get spent? We're seeing Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, the mayor, putting out kind of a terse warning to aldermen to put their wish lists in their pockets because she's got a plan and she doesn't want to deviate from it. So I think that foreshadows what I think probably is going to be a very interesting fight between one mayor and one city council in the state of Illinois. And we're probably going to see more of those.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a very interesting spring. I mean, poverty in a lot of situation, it brings tension, but so does an infusion of money. You see that dynamic play out everywhere from families to governments. But Sarah, we're still early on. It's still, early March now. We're still months away from the legislature actually having to pass the budget. But legislators are, at least the Senate, is back in Springfield this week, testing out a kind of new normal for them. Being in Springfield, having this very stringent, test protocol so they can actually be there. And, actually holding appropriations hearings along with other substantive hearings. So, Sarah, what have you seen in Springfield? And what do you think the mood is among legislators to get things done after they had, kind of a year where they were put on the sidelines for the most part because the governor was doing most things by executive order?
Yeah, it's really interesting to have the senators come back this week. So, like you mentioned, there's a COVID testing protocol. So, all of the senators and their staff and the media and anyone who wanted to be in the chamber had to take a University of Illinois saliva test at the Capitol, and then show that you had a negative test. So that's definitely kind of a new normal if they establish that protocol as something, that they're going to do going forward. But I think that the mood is productive. I think they're trying to get work done, keeping in mind that they had kind of been on the sidelines and not really been able to do as much work as they probably would have liked. And so, yeah, we've had appropriation committees and other subject matter hearings on unemployment issues and veterans' homes, and so it seems like the mood is productive, and they're trying to get things done. And hopefully, there isn't a crazy mad rush at the end of May, but that's wishful thinking. There will definitely be a crazy mad rush then.
Sure. And, Dave, there's still, though, this tension, even though lawmakers are back to work, the Senate actually in Springfield and the House, finally, after, months of talking about it, actually doing hearings on Zoom, but there's still this tension between the governor's office and the governor himself and the legislature. And, how do you think, especially taking into account, the things that we've talked about on this program in the past few weeks, for example, how the governor kind of lost his bid to install his own choice to the head of the Democratic Party of Illinois in a post-Mike Madigan world. How do you think the confidence that lawmakers, especially Democratic lawmakers, have in the governor, how do you think that plays out in this spring in a pretty critical juncture in, halfway through the governor's term? Does he have what it takes to get things over the line, or do you think that the caucuses, which are led by a lot of new folks now, do you think that they're going to take this spring, now that they're back in Springfield and back in session online? Do you think that they're going to take their independence and run with it?
Well, I mean, there's no question that Pritzker has, since November, he's suffered a string of defeats that have served to kind of weaken his stature a little bit in Springfield. I mean, the graduated income tax going down as decidedly as it did. And then, the party chairmanship issue, although I still struggle to understand kind of what his real interest was in getting involved in that fight in the first place, because, he's a candidate who has the capability of self-financing, as he did in his gubernatorial campaign, as he did with the graduated income tax. The party chairmanship really doesn't mean a whole lot to his political fortunes moving forward, his own personal fortunes. So it was kind of I think he wanted to craft the party in his own image, maybe more than anything else, but it was a fight he didn't need. I think that this session, as it is in most sessions, it's the key thing is going to be zeroing in on getting a budget passed. And I think redistricting is a big wild card. And, for any legislators who have quibbles with him, they have to remember that at the end of the day, he is the one who will sign whatever redistricting plan they have. So, any sense that, he might be losing leverage with the legislature, just remember that he controls at the end of the day what that map looks like. And there's still a lot of twists and turns on that map. We don't know, the census data is late in coming. We don't know kind of what they're going to do in May ahead of the point when a supermajority vote would be required. We don't know what they're going to do. So, he still has a lot of leverage as governor, and he'll continue to exert it, I think.
And the governor being the governor, he is making a lot of media appearances these days, including in the last few weeks, signing these high-profile bills that were pushed by the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus in lawmakers' January lame duck session. A couple of weeks ago, that was that massive criminal justice reform package, which we've discussed on this program before. But this week, the governor signed this big education package. And these are two of the 4 pillars of the Black Caucus's agenda. 3 of the 4 were passed in January, so we still have this economic development bill that's out there that the governor is expected to sign. But Sarah, what does this educational reform package do? There's parts that deal with early childhood education, primary and secondary education, college, even past that to workforce development. So, what do you think, what are, some key things that you're paying attention to that you think will actually change, the educational system in Illinois, especially for, minority communities, the ones who are supposed to benefit from this?
Yeah. It is a really all-encompassing bill. There's, like you said, K-12 and higher education. So one of the measures for younger students is giving an annual assessment to all public school students entering kindergarten. The idea is to, make sure that all that the administrators know where students are at and that they can, keep track of their progress. It also adds computer literacy courses requirements for 9th graders and laboratory science requirements for high school students that would be in line with what is required for college admission to certain public state schools. And one of the things that I think would, or is the intent, obviously, is to encourage, conversation about Black history in schools, is a provision to include more mandatory coursework on Black Americans and Black people from pre-enslavement to the American slave trade. So I think creating that part of or including that into the curriculum will hopefully create some more awareness about the struggles that have faced Black Americans. And I think that's part of the intent of the legislation. It also creates more grant programs for high-performing students. So it's like I said, really all-encompassing, and it remains to be seen whether this will, have the impact that it's intended. But I think it's a really positive first step towards achieving that intent.
And this also comes kind of concurrent to this other fight that viewers may have seen a little bit about a couple of weeks ago, this, kind of progressive standards for curriculum, that are supposed to make school and learning more inclusive. But, we want to be clear, these are two separate things. But, kind of the same spirit of the movement of, saying school is an important part of children's development, and what you learn in school, shapes the rest of your life. And tying into that, the Illinois State Board of Education this week, they came out with, altered COVID-19 standards. For example, dropping the requirement that school, folks in schools, students especially, should be 6 feet apart in order to learn. I've always, I have a lot of teacher friends, a lot of their schools are going back to 5 days a week, dropping the kind of hybrid option. But, families can still choose to learn all online if they so choose. But, Dave, what does it mean that schools are finally, this entire school year, the governor has made clear that school districts have the choice of what to do. But what does it mean for schools and families, and that kids are going to be able to go back to school? What does it mean more broadly for this fight that we've been having over the past year?
Well, I think for moms and dads who have had to more or less homeschool their kids, I think it means sanity. Actually, it will be good for everyone to have kids back in school. And, there's President Biden has indicated that's a priority of his. And so naturally it's trickling down here. I mean, we saw the dust up between Mayor Lightfoot and the Chicago Teachers Union in the last, month to 6 weeks about, getting teachers and students back into school in Chicago. But I do think that we have reached a point with the curve here where it's a legitimate issue to be getting this issue resolved and getting kids back into classrooms. We know that Republicans were gearing up, not only here, but across the country to really try to, tag Democrats for dragging their feet on this issue of getting kids back into school. So the quicker the Democrats can get this thing confronted, the quicker they take that issue off the table heading into the 2022 midterms. So I think, we're going to see rapid movement as more people get vaccinated, as we see our numbers continue to drop. I think that there's going to be a real strong appetite to do a lot of creative things to make up for lost time, as well as get things back to normal in our classrooms.
Right. And you mentioned the midterms, that looms ever larger, even though it seems like we just had an election, because we did. But the filing for 2022 opens up in September, which is not that far away. And Sarah, we just have a couple minutes here at the end. I did want to touch on this federal lawsuit that the Illinois State Rifle Association filed this week about FOID card backlogs. Now, this was an issue even before the pandemic, but the pandemic, as it did for all things, exacerbated the issue. So what does it mean that ISRA finally took the step to file a federal lawsuit? What does it mean for the Pritzker administration's response, and what happens next?
So the lawsuit that they filed, that the Illinois State Rifle Association and the Second Amendment Foundation filed this week, it deals specifically with the delays over concealed carry licenses. But the Illinois State Rifle Association has filed similar lawsuits about FOID card delays, so firearm ownership identification cards, which state residents need to have in order to purchase guns or ammunition. And the state law provides that the Illinois State Police only have to deny or accept or approve someone's application for a FOID card within 30 days, and it's either 90 or 120 days for a concealed carry license, depending on if you submit your application with fingerprints. And a lot of residents are experiencing delays much longer than that. And so that's sort of the basis for the lawsuit, is saying that these delays essentially violate residents' Second Amendment rights to bear arms and is unconstitutional. And so this has been a problem for many years. It's not new, but the State Rifle Association is serious. They're taking the administration to court, and they hope that this will hopefully make the delays less serious.
Sure. Like I mentioned before, it was an issue even before the pandemic. And it's, I guess, almost refreshing to see issues that are non-COVID come up again in a way. But, we are about out of time. I want to thank my guests, Dave McKinney from WBEZ and Sarah Mansur from Capitol News, Illinois. Join us again next time on Capitol View.